Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the NCAT webinar series, West Coast Hemp Production. Today is the third of our four-part hemp webinar series, and today we're going to be covering harvesting, processing, and marketing. My name is Mike Lewis, and I'm a sustainable agriculture specialist out of NCAT's Northeast office. For those of you who may not know, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, also known as NCAT, is a national nonprofit that's been helping people build resilient communities through local and sustainable solutions that reduce poverty, strengthen self-reliance, and protect natural resources since 1976. We provide agriculture. We work to provide agriculture education on a wide variety of sustainable agricultural topics. And today, specifically, as I said, we'll be talking about hemp processing, harvesting, and marketing. Today, we're very fortunate to have 7 of the leading hemp experts with us. I'm going to introduce these speakers in a little bit more detail later on, but just as a form of brief introduction, with us today, we have Rob Porcella, Andrew Bish, Ryan Loflin, Tom Dermody, Julie Lerner, Hunter Buffington, and Eric Singular. Real quick, I want to go through some quick housekeeping before we begin. If you could please remember to stay on mute, but feel free to leave your camera on to help foster that sense of community. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll send out the recording to registrants once it's completed. Also want to make note, this is a 2.5-hour webinar, so please feel free to take breaks as you see fit and as you need them on your own. Moving on to the run of show for today, the first half of this webinar is going to have 3 presenters focused on 3 segments of hemp production: CBD, grain, and fiber. This portion of the webinar is going to go until about 12:40. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. So as our presenters are speaking, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat box so that my colleague Catherine can compile them, and we can get those questions to the panelists on your behalf. Next up at around 12:55, we'll have a panel that will actually be discussing markets, market trends, market forces, contracts, and then how to navigate markets and contracts. And then from there, we'll have a quick question and answer session. It'll last for about 10 minutes, and hopefully we'll be closing out at about 1:30 Pacific time. I do want to mention, and Catherine will drop in the chat, we've posted a link to a brief survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could just take a few minutes to fill that survey out. This actually helps us, helps inform us on topics and information that you need in the future, and potentially we could get some of these questions and thoughts from the survey could help us shape our next webinar, the 4th in this series coming up in November. This event is sponsored, made possible by a generous award from Western Extension Risk Management. So we really want to acknowledge them and say a big thank you for their support in our educational efforts. And I do want to talk briefly about ATTRA. So ATTRA stands for Appropriate Technologies Transferred to Rural America. And beyond this webinar that we're doing today, we hope that you would continue to call on NCAT for any and all sustainable agriculture questions. NCAT manages the ATTRA program. This project is our Sustainable Agriculture program, which is funded through a cooperative agreement with the USDA World Business Cooperative Service. We do have a hotline that you can call at any time to access one-on-one technical assistance and to get help with any sustainable agriculture related questions you might have. So if you have any remaining questions after this webinar, we hope that you are excited to reach out to us, and we're happy to work with you to answer those questions. So moving right along, we're going to get started with our first round of presenters. Again, during this portion of the webinar, we're going to be talking about harvesting, drying, and processing equipment, infrastructure, hemp compliance, how do you maintain quality standards and testing, and a little bit touch on marketing. And we'll be talking about all of those things again in the context of cannabinoid production, grain production, and finally fiber production. We're fortunate, like I said earlier, to have three amazing experts who are leaders in their field with us today. I'm going to quickly introduce all three of them and then let them get started. But our CBD expert is Rob Porcella. Rob is the owner of Pacific Hemp Consulting and serves on the California Industrial Hemp Advisory Board. He spent more than 20 years working on business development through team building and leadership roles in his small business empire. Rob decided to dive into the realm of industrial hemp in 2016, and he's dedicated the last 5 years of his life to this burgeoning industry. As a founding partner of Pacific Hemp Consulting, he has created a strategic network of hemp services and advises farmers on how to effectively set up their hemp growing operations and the importance of securing strong partnerships throughout the supply chain. Today, we're fortunate, our grain expert with us today is much more than a grain expert, as you'll probably see, but he's helping us out in this capacity today is Andrew Bish. Andrew is the founder and CEO of Hemp Harvest Works and also serves as a COO of Bish Enterprises. Bish Enterprises is a third generation harvest equipment manufacturer that was founded in 1976. Hemp Harvest Works is a machinery sales business focused on bringing a complete line of equipment and ancillary solutions to hemp producers and processors. Additionally, Andrew's service philosophy founded the mission of the Nebraska Hemp Industries Association, and as president, his vision is to increase awareness and increase opportunities for hemp farmers, processors, manufacturers, and retailers through advocacy, education, partnerships, and leadership development. Andrew also serves as the vice president of the Hemp Feed Coalition, and he is the director of the Standing Committee of Hemp Organizations. Today, our fiber expert is Ryan Loflin, and in 2013, Ryan was the first American farmer in 57 years to grow, successfully harvest, and process a commercial scale industrial hemp crop in the United States. Ryan is a fourth generation Colorado farmer in southeastern part of the state, and he spent over 20 years building custom homes and has a background in construction as well as farming. His experience in the building industry gives Ryan expertise and knowledge needed to create hemp building materials. After creating Rocky Mountain Hemp Company in 2013, Ryan purchased the family farm from his father. Rocky Mountain Hemp is dedicated to leading efforts in legalizing industrial hemp farming in the United States and continues to pursue the development of hemp seed genetics while perfecting the nuances of hemp farming in Colorado. He is also a partner at Western Fiber, which is a leader in the hemp fiber industry, and they've recently opened a hemp fiber processing facility in the state of California. Now with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Rob.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Rob Porcella, and again, Pacific Hemp Consulting is my business. Been working in the industrial hemp sector since 2016. I started with a Chinese company that specialized in CBD and isolate manufacturing, which led me to Kentucky with a joint venture between them and some Kentucky farmers. So I've been working in the sector for a while. The last 3 years now, been able to grow hemp in California, which is my home state. And so I've been working with some farmers here locally in Central California. And I'm also on the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board, as he mentioned, which is something that has been a challenge, to say the least. But let me bring up my presentation here. Oops, go back up. All right. Okay, so hemp farming success begins with a plan. This is kind of my message to farmers as we. Are you guys able to see the screen, or is it showing me?
We can
Yeah,
see
we
you.
can see your screen.
We're all set, Rob.
Okay, good, thank you. So I was sort of responsible for connecting growers to extractors. You know, my work in Kentucky had led me to Colorado, and where extractors have been setting up for many years. So we were able to form some partnerships with our local California farms and the Colorado extractors. And really briefly, for those that didn't get to hear, I've been deathly ill. I took a COVID test yesterday. I thought for sure I had COVID. I've been in bed for the last 48 hours. So I just barely crawled out of bed this late morning in time to be here. So bear with me if I go into any coughing fits or anything. Yeah, I did test negative for COVID though, so that was, I guess, a good thing. So hemp sourcing and supply chain is kind of what I do now. We have a nursery here in Central California. We have a seed bank, mainly biomass type varieties of hemp for high CBD. And we do have access to some smokable varieties as well, which we are growing this year. But the bulk of our seed bank is for biomass procurement. And so we're able to sow those seeds, propagate the seedlings, and ship out, you know, around the nation. So that is something, services that we offer. These are varieties that we've worked with here in California for the last 3 years and have had really good success with them, which if you have any interest in any of that, my email is here on the screen. I'll post it again at the end for you to be able to reach out to me. But you know, that's kind of where it all starts is with the seed. And believe me, I spent a lot of time in the early years trying to procure good seed. There were a lot of supposed, you know, seed providers in the industry that this industry is full of people that are claiming to be something that they're not, is kind of what I found out early on. And it took me a long time to sort of weed through those people and find the good contacts. And you know, I've grown some varieties that I would never grow again. And I've also grown some really positive varieties that we continue to grow to this day. So getting started with this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the last year's grow. I was hired by a very large grower here in Central California. We had upwards of 400 acres of hemp that we planted. We did a soil analysis prior to getting started on this project, and it actually advised the grower that we find some different land to do it on. Wouldn't really call this dirt soil. It was more like just dirt. So we had to put a lot of amendments into it initially. It was quite a challenge to grow on this. In these photos, you can see some of the irrigation going in as they're laying the drip on the right-hand side. It brings me to one issue with this soil, which was greatly challenging, and that drip tape is being put about 6 inches subsurface, and we had a lot of trouble getting the water to push up to the surface in the soil. And what we saw was a lot of loss. It was very costly. These hemp seedlings, so in Central California, we have very hot summers, and we actually, the other thing, timing of getting this crop in is very important, and our timing was not on point. So getting this crop in late, it was late June, early July. We had trouble getting water to the surface. And what I can tell you about these seedlings is with the heat and the wind that we had out on this facility, if you don't have a moisture barrier over the top of those little seedlings for at least the first 10 to 12 days, it's kind of like a stovepipe effect. And if there's not moisture at the surface, within, I'd say about 18 hours or so, those seedlings will die if they do not have a moisture barrier over the top of them. And in some places, we could not get the moisture up to the surface, and we lost a lot of our seedlings, which was a tough lesson learned. And having the subsurface drip in soil where the water did not like to rise to the surface was definitely very costly. We came in as just a measure to try to prevent the loss, and we ended up just running a whole lot of surface drip, which actually was really quite successful. And with the drip on the surface, it was, it was great. The plants were very happy. But again, having that moisture barrier along the top surface is extremely important. So there was definitely a lot of irrigation issues, something we would do differently this time, giving ourselves a little more space at the end of the rows, the transplanters, not having enough room to turn around. If you think you have enough room, give yourself more. We had 30 feet between the, from one plot to the next, which only gave us about 15 feet for turning, and it was quite difficult. I would highly recommend that you give yourself extra room at the end of your plots, especially if you have above surface irrigation like we had. Let's see. Here's our seedlings in the greenhouse prior to being shipped. Again, we ran about 8 different varieties. And some of them I would not grow again. There's a lot of, we tried to save costs. And I mean, honestly, the old adage that you get what you pay for, there's something to that. We got some, bargain prices on some stuff. And I think we saw the results of it. They were not established. They were prone to early flower. We had varieties that I would say 30% of them went into early flower, which made it very difficult come harvest time and actually passing the compliance testing. There we end up actually removing a lot of the plants for fear of failing our compliance testing. But we just tried a number of different varieties, and this variety here, actually, I'm not sure which one we're looking at here, but again, we had over 1 million plants that we planted. And actually, with the replantings that we did, it was, I think, 1.3 or 1.4 million total plants that went in. But yeah, having the proper facility for propagation is very important. As you can see, the germ rate on these was really pretty good. I think all the varieties that we had, the germ rate was above 85%. So that was actually pretty good. And I know a lot of that has to do with the medium that you're putting these seeds in and the kind of care that they get in the greenhouse as well. And we had that part of it covered. So that actually, this part of the grow, we were very hopeful and positive that things were going in the right direction. So we get the 22 to 25 days or so, and so in fact we had a few hangups to plan for the things aren't going to go right. I guess that's I think how farming is in general. We did definitely have some delays that caused some of our plants to stretch. And I think what you're looking at here is some that actually stretched a little too much. And with the wind that we have, a lot of them a lot of them got bent over. They actually still grew. Some of you can snap the stems on these things from wind or whatever, or mishandling, and they'll actually, some of them will stand back up. Some of them will, forever have a kink in them, and some of them won't make it. But if getting them in the soil timely is important, not letting them stretch, because some of them, the timing was just way off, and they stretched, and we had a lot of loss on those. A lot of them that broke off just didn't make it. So we used a Ferrari transplanter, and we had up to 3 of them going at a time. And the majority of the planting that we did was at night. The temperatures during the day were in excess of 100 degrees. And so we were just trying to do what was going to be best for these plants. And we did some daytime planting with not really good results. We had a lot of loss on our day plants, and that was unfortunate. So we switched to nighttime planting, and pretty much stuck with that from once we saw the kind of losses that we experienced during the day. We ran on 60-inch beds, and I think our spacing was 48 or 45 inches. I can't remember exactly. We played with it quite a bit. But the one thing I would not do again is these raised beds, and we kind of did this out of necessity because the dirt was, the soil was so poor. All the amendments that we put in, we tried to bring everything sort of to the surface, and in order to do that, we use these raised beds. But if you can do fairly flat planting as opposed to these raised beds, I would strongly recommend it. These are just a lot more difficult to work in, and I don't think that it's entirely necessary or at all if your soil profile is good, that making these large beds. I mean, these beds, it's kind of hard to tell in this photo, but I think these things were like 18 inches high. It was just kind of a struggle to move around and walk, and equipment and everything else. So I would definitely go away from the raised beds if possible. And here's some more photos, kind of mid-season. As you can see up here on the top left, we had just a lot of loss in these areas. The mortality rate was high on some of these sections. Just a combination of things. Really, the majority of our loss happened right after transplants, and it was due to the fact that, again, I can't stress enough, moisture barrier on the surface for these plants is absolutely critical, at least in our climate here in Central California, because I just watched as the lack of moisture on the surface just destroyed, tens of thousands of seedlings in multiple different areas. You could just watch them wilt away and die. And yeah, so we had a lot of loss, unfortunately, and I can't stress enough the moisture barrier on the surface. And let's see, we had a Merlot. This is a Merlot plant that we had, which is one of the varieties that we grew. It's a Shakti variety, and it's what we're now offering out of our greenhouse here in Central California. Very consistent. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you look back behind it, the similarity in all the plants was very, very consistent. This helped us to pass our pre-harvest testing. When you have plants that are all maturing at the same rate, that makes it so much easier to gauge when to do your pre-harvest testing. And some of our other plots, as you can see, like I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but we had a lot of small plants that went into early flowering. And again, it was very concerning for the pre-harvest. We did not want those being sampled. And when you have a field that is littered with, you know, a lot of different stages of growth, it makes the pre-harvest testing next to impossible to gauge when you should do it. But again, our Merlot, we passed with no problems. I think on the Merlot, we were at about a 0.18 or 0.2 at our pre-harvest testing. In California, I don't know how it is in other states, but I know last year we were able to take the top 18 inches of the plant. I think it was 18 inches. Pretty sure it was the top 18. So from the top 18 inches, and then you also got to sample a lower branch, 18 inches on a lower, which made passing the pre-harvest testing much, much easier, because these lower branches had very little flower growth on them. There was a lot of leaf and a lot of stem, and it helped to dilute the sample. Excuse me. This year, however, in California, they have now switched to the top 8 inches. I think it's 8 inches. I just did a sample 2 weeks ago. It's either 8 or 12 inches, but they've now gone to just the top portion. So this makes it much more difficult to pass the pre-harvest testing. I can't stress enough to test early with these plants. Start testing with your most mature ones, the ones that have the densest flower, the most cannabinoids on the flower. You'll have some, no matter what, that are just ahead of the curve. And those are the ones you should start testing early to gauge when you need to have that test done. It's extremely stressful to find out you're at a point where you waited too long. And unfortunately, I've been there a number of times, and I would just strongly recommend testing early and often to gauge when you need to bring that final pre-harvest test in. Of course, you want that fine line of, you know, maximum cannabinoid production. But if you fail that pre-harvest, you have failed yourself completely, and you won't get anything out of those plots. So testing early and often is critical. Here's some, I went back to my 2018 grow on this slide. Excuse me. I just kind of wanted to show the difference between good soil and getting in early. We had really, really good production on this field in 2019, and we were able to see upwards of 2 pounds of flower material per plant. That's dry weight out of some of these plots. Again, this was some of the Shakti varieties that we have had success with over a couple of years now. And we, in 2019, with the right conditions, getting in the plants in the ground early June, you can see the size of some of these plants, and we had really good success. What we didn't have was a really good fertigation program going. Unfortunately, our cannabinoid potency topped out around 7.5 or so, but we did have a lot of mass out of this grow. So that was just something I wanted to show from the year before. And here's some of the harvesting equipment that we used. We had a couple of different swathers that we used. This one had a custom built header on it with some rotating blades. This one worked really good for large plants. It was not good on small plants like these. We found that a swather with a sickle bar cutter was actually more effective on these small plants, as long as you could, you know, keep it just off the ground. That was another problem with these beds, was again, too much debris getting caught up in the sickle bar and everything. But this was the custom header. We also had a lot of success just hand cutting. We went back to hand cutting and we had crews available. So you can see over here, we just had people cutting and putting them together in windrows. We did a couple different things too. This is just a silage chopper. We tried a number of different harvests of harvesting methods. Again, between the swathers, the hand cutting, the silage choppers, and some combines that we used. Kind of knew this ahead of time, and I don't, there's two schools of thought on this. One is that dried plants being harvested in the field, the cannabinoids kind of turn to dust and blow away, and you can lose potency in that way. But it, to me, is still the safer method than a wet harvest, and the proof was in the results that we got from our material at the end of last season. And again, here's some dried material. These things actually over dried in the field. We left them out for, I think, 8 or 9, maybe almost 10 days in some cases, which was really too long in our opinion. But again, timing of things just was to that's where we wound up. As you can see here on the right, this is all the dried material. We also had wet material that was from the silage chopper. So what we had was a Go Wheel LT Master baler, which worked really well for wet baling the material. We actually tried to bale this material with the Go Wheel, and I could not quite get, I couldn't get it working to where it was not falling apart. The bales just would not stick together, but our material was excessively dry, and therefore we had trouble with that. It worked really well with the wet material. However, in the end, our results really spoke for themselves. Like I said, we had the dry material, we had about 8.5 to 9% CBD. And this wet material, we also had some hangups in our transportation getting to the extractor. But we only had about 4% CBD with the wet material. And I think the degradation happened when it was inside the bales. We did fill these with nitrogen, which is, supposed to be done in order to prevent that. But we had only, around 4% with this material. It sat on the trucks too long. I think it got warm. And I think that was the loss that we experienced. So my 2 cents for it is do not wet bale. Try to field dry if you have the opportunity, which we did. And yeah, so this is just some other consulting services that we offer. And there's my contact information. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. If you have any other questions, I'll try to hang around. Excuse me, I may leave and come back towards the end. Let's see. Towards the end of this, I'm not feeling super good, but thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob, for taking the time in your current condition. And Andrew, if you're there, I'll go ahead and hand well, there's no literal microphone, so I'm just going to hand the computer to you.
Okay, let's see if we can get this screen shared real quick. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. That should be perfect. Yellow and gray. Fantastic. Okay. So Mike, you did a great job introducing me. So I'm just going to skip through all of those introductions and go right into talking about grain harvesting, growing grain in general. Whenever I talk about this subject, I do like to harken back to some of our predecessors and how things used to be done, so that when we get into understanding where we are today, it's really helpful to understand where we came from. Historically, as we've grown hemp throughout the United States, we've done it mainly for the fiber purposes. And it's just been recently that we've started to work with not only cannabinoids, but some of the grain And you can see here some of the equipment that they used. They weren't even grain focused. Most of this is not something that you would do if you were focused on doing things for grain harvesting. So this is kind of where, again, America started, but we're going to get into some videos of where America is. There's a lot of different commodity types with hemp, which make it unique. And when we're talking about growing for fiber or grain or cannabinoids, and I'm obviously talking about grain, you do need to pick one as your primary source. And then you can look at some of the others as secondary. So you could grow for grain and then use stock material as a secondary option, or potentially gather cannabinoids as secondary. And you could do that a lot of different ways, but you have to decide what the primary source is going to be. And today, like I said, we're going to talk about grain as a primary source of revenue. So here's what a hemp grain field looks like. This, by the way, is not what all of them look like. This is a varietal called X59. It's a unique varietal in the way that it typically grows one large seed head at the top of the plant. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. You're also seeing the effects of some of the grasshoppers that impacted the field. But long story short, this is what a traditional grain field might look like. As we talk about these different commodities, I think it's really important to understand the marketplace. And while we have some economic experts here today, I want to talk a little bit about some of the price points relative to grain. So here we can see a chart from PanXchange. And this kind of goes over some of the price points of CBD crude, winterized crude, but also if you look on here, there's a couple items that cover hemp grain. So current hemp grain pricing, we're looking at conventional grain going for a midpoint of about 65 cents, and an organic grain going for about $1.13, maybe $1.15, depending on where you're selling that. And that's on a per pound basis. Now, when we look at industrial hemp versus wheat and corn, you'll notice that there's substantially better revenue than what you're looking at from a wheat perspective, and it is very comparable to corn. So when we're looking at it from a rotational crop standpoint, it is viable monetarily. What we've got here is a conventional price point where we're pulling 55 cents as is the price that we're assuming on this particular crop, which would net us about $550 per acre. And then if we were to bale the secondary product, which would be the stalks, you could net another $600. Now, if you were going to organic pricing, your grain return per acre would double, and your fiber return would probably stay very much the same, as we don't really have different price points on conventional versus organic stocks at this point. This is a financial model that can be helpful when we're talking about grain processing, just to give you an idea of what those returns actually might look like when you pull out some of the seed costs and things like that. So if you were looking at an organic or a conventional at around 1,250 acres, you could see on the gross return on the organic would be about 1.2 million, with the conventional being about half of that. And when you look at seed cost, we estimate about 156,000 versus 119,000 on the organic versus conventional. We're considering about a 475 input cost. Could be as low as 425 on conventional. And then our farm expense there, which would be starting the tractors, rent on the land, those types of things come into play. And at the end of the day, what you're looking at is an estimated net return per acre on organic at that type of acreage at just over almost $500 versus $29.50 on conventional, and a per bushel rate of return of $11 versus 67 cents. So how does a farm achieve these results? Most of it's going to be proper planning and agronomy techniques. What you're seeing here is a large drill system going in Colorado. This is actually filmed in the San Luis Valley, and they're planting a grain and fiber crop with that tractor. So when you look at planting, there's a couple different ways to do it. If you're doing a traditional grain crop, you're probably going to use a planter versus a drill. Grain is typically planted at on 30-inch row spacing, and your population density will likely be between 20 and 25 pounds per acre. Whereas if you were growing for a fiber crop, you might be looking at growing somewhere between 45 and potentially 75 pounds per acre. This is an example of some of what we've seen when using a planting under biodegradable film, which is an option that you can use with a planter. And you see substantially better root development. And if you're in an area that struggles with moisture, this might be a great option for you. Or if you also have abnormally cold conditions, this can really help from a germination standpoint. Now, as we get into mid-season, there is going to be some cultivation that's going to happen. That's a precision cultivator, and I apologize, it didn't have my mute on there. Fix that. But this is precision cultivator. So normal cultivation techniques will work with hemp grain, especially if you're using the standard 30-inch row spacing. Now, if you're in an area of the country that uses different row spacing, maybe you're in Southeast Texas and you're at 38-inch row spacing, 36-inch row spacing, something like that, you probably can continue to use the row spacing that's similar to your tractor and equipment. But long story short, conventional equipment is going to work very well from a cultivation standpoint. Now we get into harvesting. Here's an example of what it looks like to harvest a hemp field. This is an overhead view of a field that we worked with a producer in eastern Colorado on. As you can see here, we're bringing the material in, and we are leaving a windrow of stock material behind the combine. This particular field has a lot of the challenges that a lot of growers will have early on, where you've got inconsistent results, mainly because of lack of information. So the previous gentleman talked about genetics. That's been a big problem, even in the grain side of things. There's a lot of good genetics that have been grown for a long time in Canada that can be incorporated into the northern parts of the United States. But as we start to get a little more southerly, that starts to fall apart. And then the grain crops that are known to work well in the southern locations, they're just really not known, and not a lot of testing has been done. From a combine setting standpoint, there's a lot that's going to have to be worked on, but typically the air, sieve, chaffer settings are similar to wheat from a starting point, and then we advise people to adjust from that point forward. So I would set my cylinder at about 450 to 600 RPM with a concave somewhere between 30 and 50 millimeters with about 1,000 RPM of air movement with 3 millimeters on the sieve and 10 millimeters of the chaffer being opened. And again, these would be starting points for somebody, and then you'll have to adjust to your field from that point. But that's at least a good baseline to work from. Here's a little video of a draper header actually running in a field, and some of the challenges that we see from draper headers are sometimes we end up throwing some of these heads back forward. The reel can oftentimes get in the way. Here's another video of a draper header from a little bit further back. You can see where some stalks are hanging up on that reel. And one of the things you'll notice if you work with hemp grain is that you do start to develop a lot of wrapping issues. This is an example of kind of a system if you were going to do more than one commodity, if you were growing for a grain and fiber and harvesting it in one pass. This would be something a person might do. Here's another option out there on the marketplace. This actually uses a stripper header and a vacuum cart. So what's happening here is the stripper header is actually mounted on a tractor, and it's taking the tops of the plants off. This then goes into the hopper in the back, which is sealed with and has filters for air to escape out the top. But once it's back at the facility, then you can run it through a grain cleaner. And then ultimately you could theoretically harvest your entire field without a combine with this particular setup the way that it is. One of the challenges you're going to see from a stripper header standpoint, this is just another view. You don't want to have a crop that's got males in it. They die off earlier than the female plants. They start to wrap up in stripper headers really, really bad. So that's definitely a problem. Let's take a look at some of what the harvest challenges are. Here's a field out in Montana, and a producer out there. This is a John Deere S670 combine. And we'll just take a look. As the combine sits here, everything seems to be in perfectly good order. Doesn't look like there's any major problems. But as we start to dig into the combine a little bit, actually we'll dig into that here in just a second. I forgot about this immediate challenge I wanted to bring up, which is your genetic. As you go to the field, you notice the field on the left. You can see the height of the material there. We're barely up to the waist of a gentleman that's about 5'8" tall. Whereas the field on the right, I've got a car up against the field there, and you've got a variety that's in excess of 10 to 11 feet. So as you start to, move forward with whatever you're going to do, understanding the genetics, how they're going to grow in your area, this field on the right looks like, yeah, that'd be what I'd want from a yield perspective. However, the manageability of that field on the right is very, very complicated. The field on the left, a lot less yield, but a lot less complicated in terms of actually bringing the material in. So this is what that combine looks like. As we start to get a little bit closer to it, you'll notice that we've got some stock accumulation building up. This is a picture from inside the back of the combine. And what happens is once you start to build up a little bit of material, you really start to build up a lot of material. Here's another picture as we get a little bit further back, and you can just see how more and more material has started to build up and build up and build up, and now it's just hanging out at the back of the combine. So that's going to physically take an operator to get back there, take a look at the combine every couple passes to ensure that we don't have that type of buildup. Here's some additional problems you're going to see. Wrapping is pretty persistent as you're entering harvest. This picture on the right is there's a bearing there, and we're starting to wrap up around that bearing. Over time, what you'll start to see is some heat occur, and then you could start to smolder and have a fire. Now, one of the nice things, and here's a picture of what this actually looks like. This is some of the material that's started to burn. It's been spinning for a long time, got very hot, and then started to smoke. One of the nice things about hemp, different from, let's say, sunflowers, for instance, is that it typically is going to smoke before it fires. So you generally have a fair amount of time to get into the field, or sorry, to get to the location of the smoke and actually get the material cut out. So that's one of the benefits of hemp when you look at it from a fire resistant standpoint, that aids you in harvesting. But these are real world results that we've seen. And this picture here that you're looking at, actually, I just pulled out of a field about 2 weeks ago off of a machine in which smoke had completely filled the cab. And the operator got out, expected a huge fire, and found that it was just this small amount of material that was smoldering. This is what the inside of a combine bin looks like. And what we're going to look at here is kind of what some of the challenge of moving hemp looks like. And that's going to be this auger here. So as I switch sides, I want you to notice the seed buildup that is appearing on the auger. And that's basically loss for a producer. Augers are not great ways to move hemp seed, hemp grain. It's not the way to do it. Conveyance material items are really what needs to be used, or air movement. Unfortunately, in a combine, you're often very limited to what your options are, and your options are typically to run an auger. So you're going to have this, and this is some of the loss that you want to plan for right up front, and you can visibly see how it's just building up, and it breaks the seeds, and then wraps up on that auger, and that'll have to be cleaned out at some point. Now, this is a picture of a different style combine. This is a combine we actually had on our facility up until just a couple days ago. And this item comes from Belgium as one of the few conventional combines that New Holland has in North America. And a conventional combine is going to have less wrapping, internal wrapping issues. This model is a CX 8.80. In the United States, typically you'll see CR 8.80s or CR 8.70s or CR whatever. But the CX series, which is again a conventional combine, which does not use a rotor, essentially it threshes in one revolution inside of the combine, does not use spinning rotor action, and then the chaff and the stalks actually come out from two different spots on the combine, which is again something that really helps from a reduction of wrapping standpoint from the internal components. Now, older John Deeres are typically conventional combines. You can also get a W series combine imported from Europe, or possibly a T series combine from Canada, but the T is kind of a cross between a rotor and a conventional combine. The challenge of bringing combines in from Europe is they typically don't have the same parts that the combines use in the United States. And so you are very, very limited on a part standpoint. So if you go to the dealer is probably going to tell you, we don't have that part. So keep that in mind if you're looking to bring a combine in from overseas. But a conventional combine will last longer in hemp and will give you a better result time in and time out. Here's another challenge. A lot of people don't realize how important it is to clean your seed. And I've got some pictures of this, but if you look at this main photo here on the left, and then the zoomed in part on the right, I actually thought that the customer had a lot of dirt in the bin. The seed looks very dirty, but as you start to zoom in on it, what you find out is, yeah, there's some foreign material in there, but it's mainly pigweed seed. So it's really important as we go into drying and storage that you're getting those seeds cleaned before they go into the bin rather than after. It can make a big difference in terms of your dry time and overall quality of product. Here's a example of what you might do from a grain drying standpoint. I put a little pro tip down here: avoid heated air. Hemp seed oil, it's going to go bad in heat. You're going to end up ruining your commodity if you add heat to it. So it's something you want to use typically cool air, or the air temperature, the ambient air temperature around you would be the maximum temperature that you typically are going to want to use. You're typically harvesting hemp grain in a wetter state, so it definitely does need drying down, and it tends to get hot on its own due to this wet state. So ensuring that you've got fans on the hemp seed as it's entering the bin is very, very important. Here's an example of what a on-site or mobile cleaning solution might look like. This is a setup that we put together for a gentleman up in South Dakota that did 1,400 acres of grain this year. You'll notice that these are conveyors that we're using. We're not using augers in this situation. Again, trying to maintain the quality of seed. This is what you call a drum seed cleaner. And it's a multi-stage seed cleaner that uses both filters and air as a separation technique. But as this farmer goes into the bin, he's going to have pretty much completely clean seed. It's going to help ensure that it dries down rapidly, and then he's going to have a excellent quality product to sell as he goes to market. This is an example of kind of what seed cleaning looks like. This is another type of seed cleaner. This is actually a screen cleaner. This one doesn't use air, but uses screens to separate out. So it's all based on size. In this application, they're dumping the seed in with bags. Again, typically you'd probably convey that into the top of a machine from an efficiency standpoint. And then storage. Storage is going to be important, and typical grain bins are what you're going to use. This is a setup up in Montana, and this setup here, you'll notice that it actually has all of these different tubes because what's happening here is they're moving all of the hemp with air rather than using a conveyor or an auger. They're using air. It works very, very well. You don't get a lot of buildup in the lines. You don't get a lot of breakage. You end up with a same quality seed going into the tube as you do coming out of the tube. And Willinga is the company that's set up this air system in Montana there. Now, once you store, and we go into the next stage, which is going to be processing, color sorters become handy to separate out the good seed from seed that may not be as good a quality. The sorting precision on a color sorter is typically greater than 99.9%. It's going to be able to identify any foreign matter, any foreign material, and we can see as we walk into a processing facility here, over on the left, we see where they have a color sorter up there actually grading the seeds that are coming through. Over in the middle of the screen, this is actually what a dehuller looks like. So this particular piece of equipment is actually taking the outside shell off of the seed so that you can get to the inside, oftentimes known as the hemp heart, as it's been trademarked by Manitoba Harvest, but it's the high protein area of the seed that also contains oil. This next slide here, we see how some of there's seeds stored in super sacks, and then there's a screw press up in the top left corner. And we're actually going to take a little look at a video of what that screw press action looks like here in just a minute. This next slide here, again, some indoor storage. You'll notice the color sorters, and then in this particular facility, they typically move hemp meal, which is they move that into a barrel. And we'll take a look at what hemp meal looks like here in just a moment. So this is the inside of a very large seed press. This is what you call a long barrel seed press. And essentially, it's continuing to move grain into it. And what's coming out the bottom of this is going to be the oil. Now, as we look at the front side of this screw press, we're going to see the hemp meal, or the hemp cake, as it's called, coming out. So this is going to be the byproduct of pressing for oil. This is typically low moisture. Most of the oil's been pulled out, and your protein content here will typically range from about 20 to 45%, depending on how you cleaned it up from this point. There's oftentimes a lot of shell particles and other things in it. And if you go into a cleaning process, you can improve the protein content quite dramatically. So that is about the end of my time. This is our website. Feel free to visit us at bishenterprise.com or hempharvestworks.com. And we'll be happy to share with you any of the information we have about equipment and can help you make some better decisions about what you're going to do with your product as it comes into this next season as well. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I do want to go ahead and point out that because you put your information up there that Andrew's family is not specifically focused on grain. They also have a lot of expertise in cannabinoid and fiber harvesting as well. So I'm excited to Ryan Loflin. I think I did Ryan's introduction earlier. I want to point out a quick distinction on that. I said that Ryan began hemp farming in 2013. And for those of us that know, that was pre-Farm Bill. So Ryan is truly a pioneer in this space. And I'm really excited that he was able to join us. So Ryan, thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I truly believe that industrial hemp is the most important crop in our generation. And we just got to really find a way to make it work for us and not us work for it. So yeah, I guess I'll just touch on a few of the harvesting aspects and processing. And I think the other gentleman really covered the growing side extremely well. I do appreciate everybody's struggle because it is a battle with harvesting from day one. And it really doesn't matter what crop you're farming. When harvest time comes, it's all hands on deck, and everyone's better be on their game because you are working on your equipment the whole time. And so hemp is no exception with that. And it actually is a whole nother animal, in fact, and it can destroy and burn down your combines and about anything else you decide to run through it. So, with that being said, we've kind of started from the very beginning when there was nothing, zero equipment to use that was customized for hemp production in Colorado, in the United States anyway. And so we kind of had to go back to old ways and use sickle bar mowers and we did successfully combine grain out of with old school gleaner combines. And so the gleaners actually worked really well because you could work on them, simple as that. And so with a few retrofitting, it wasn't too difficult to get it through the field. And truly the whole stage of sequence of events with harvesting and drying, I caught the end of Andrew's presentation, and truly, yeah, the drying is critical with the seed, and cleaning it right away is also, because it'll mold if you don't get all that pigweed seed out of there that was like in Andrew's photo. All that stuff will rot and mold overnight. It can. And so its spoilage is really sensitive concern of yours. And so you really got to clean it as fast as possible and get it dried down, get your moisture down, to where it's storable, and then it can be put in the bin. And so all those little nuances of learning, and the technology is coming online now, so it's really helping make it more profitable and a little more predictable. And there's just we like to for the fiber production that we've been doing, we use sickle bars to take it down, and we have used draper heads on swathers and just continue to reel, and so that helped push it to a manageable area, I guess, and then we could windrow it from there and rake it. And that was pretty successful just for fiber. The dual crop production is a little different. You really need to come through with a combine and harvest that seed first, and then you can come back and swath and bale the stalks that's left right there on the end. And so there's several avenues right now with the processing that is opening up. Andrew is kind of a leader in that, and so is Andrew Bishop in Montana with his company Ag Processing Solutions, is really doing a lot of really good things out there in Montana. And so we're really hoping that we can continue the processing side, because honestly I think that is really where our hang up and our hurdle is in the industry, that it's really kind of slowing us, is really the processing side. Farmers need to be able to grow this crop, know they have a place to go with it, and be paid. It's pretty simple. But until we reach that point, no one's honestly really going to take us that serious. And so we really need to get this into commodity style production, and focus on those areas that are successful, and that'll bring success to the industry as a whole, as soon as we can come together, and get the processing going, and really focus on all those aspects. The growing side, is pretty, I don't want to use the word simple, but as farmers, we can adapt to basically grow about any crop, as long as we have proper genetics, and it really likes our latitude as far as hemp is concerned. So yeah, that's really, I see a few hurdles with the industry being in the processing side, and I really hope that we can expand on regional processing throughout the United States, and bring it to several different areas in the country that are, rural areas of America are really struggling, and small town America is kind of going away, and cities are just absorbing them into the landscape, and it's getting farther and farther away from populated areas. And so we really need to, I believe, bring those communities back to life with agriculture. We've started out as a agrarian society, and we've gotten away from that. And so I think we really, especially with the current times and what's going on, I think we could simplify our lives really, and get back out to rural America, and rebuild these communities for the quality of life that people really desire in the city, and they can have in the rural communities, but we just don't have the ability to sustain them. And so we need facilities in these areas that are regionally, that connect us to the lifelines of our country, because right now we're just kind of kicked off to the side, and not a lot of people really understand what's going on out in rural America, and until we can bridge that gap between city and rural America, we're really gonna most people don't understand where their food comes from, and it's really a challenge to bring hemp into this equation that's already struggling. So I think if we can really focus on processing regionally throughout each state, and in those states that really produce great grain, let's build facilities for grain processing, where we can grow really amazing fiber. Let's set up fiber processing in those areas. And so I think we've almost got the chicken before the egg concept right now, and we're trying to convince people to really grow this crop, and right now the market is struggling and coming online slowly, but it's because there's really no supply chain that can sustain it because of the lack of processing and production. And we know we can produce successfully, given the right genetics, the right climate, water, pH, all these simple things that we do with every other crop that we grow. We can, focus on those nuances and those areas of hemp that really need to be focused on, and then be successful as a grower, and then have a place to take our crop. And so I think those areas are so critical in our industry of taking it to the next step, and having big industry like the automotive industry take it serious, because composites and our market is right now, it's kind of really not much. The CBD industry has established the dominant market, and it's kind of fading out. And right now we kind of really need to come online with something serious. And I believe that's, oil production, when we can produce, fuel on the farm. I think all these things are possibilities for anybody to do, given the right tools. And so I think, we really need to bring on all these, different areas of commerce. We can relocate these processing facilities where there's a big either rail system or a highway system that will support transportation of the goods that we need to process. Sorry for the background noise. My puppy found a can. Jesse. So yeah, not to get sidetracked, but and so the markets, I think, really that are going to come from this are the hempcrete market, the animal bedding market, the building materials. Really, I think we can transform how we build houses in a more healthier way by using hemp for alternative materials. And as a builder, a person with a strong building background, I see the amount of really toxic glues and formaldehyde that fill most people's homes, and they don't even understand why they built this brand new, not even, some are multi-million-dollar homes, and they come through and they all end up being sick later. And it's because there's a lot of toxic fumes in that home from all the glues. And so we really have an ability to get rid of all that. We got lignans in this plant. We could extract the lignans and create, some more natural products easily. And incorporating other natural products with the hemp, like flax and, other commodities that can be produced on the farm, is really critical to, same thing, this hemp industry really becoming serious and advancing into where we all know it can be. And that is supplying, building materials, automotive materials, food, clothing, all of these things, fuel that we all know this plant can do. But until we have processing and until we really commoditize this crop, we're not really going to get there. And so we've got to focus on those areas, I truly believe. And then everything will come after that. The big industry will be like, okay, yeah, we can buy this amount of hemp plastic from this company, because now they can produce it and keep producing it every day and fulfill our contract. But right now we're just not kind of there quite yet. And I'm optimistic and super hopeful that this next, it's almost been 10 years that I've been doing this. And so I'm really hopeful that the next 10 years we can really pull together and focus on what is important for the whole. And the whole is, farmers making money. And until we really do that, the whole country will suffer. People don't understand that small town America that is struggling is a really big cog in this wheel that we call a country. And we need every cog in the wheel in order to roll. And so if we don't have everything in place, we're just kind of, spinning our wheels. So I'm really hopeful, and, I see the future kind of coming upon us. And, the markets are there. They're just, I get calls all the time from pretty big industry, but, as soon as we kind of start to nuts and bolts of the conversation, it's really hard to supply the demand. And so, processing is really the key, I think, to this industry moving forward. And the equipment, I mean, Andrew covered a lot of it. I mean, his presentation was awesome. And so I really think that he spotlighted on a lot of really good new technologies that's coming online. It's very exciting for a grower to see what's all available and what's going to be in the future too, to really kick this thing in the butt and get respect from the rest of the world in the industry. I mean, look how much corn we produce and look how much hemp we produce. it's really, we're kind of laughable right now. And I get it, because we don't have ethanol plants producing hemp fuel, and they do in corn. They do a lot for corn. And so until we can build some processing and really products that can be made from this plant, we're just talking. And so I really hope that people kind of get my message here, that let's focus on investing in processing. We need to pressure our legislators in every state and our governors and say, why aren't you states building hemp processing facilities in rural communities that really need stimulated? And we have stimulus money. Is this a perfect opportunity for states to build infrastructure, in my opinion, that are processing facilities to better rural communities, which will spill over into the cities, and people will have goods made from hemp. But until we reach this point, we're kind of, like I say, the chicken before the egg. And so I'm hoping we're having an omelet here very soon, and this all works out. I truly believe it will, because there's some really good people standing behind it and dedicating a lot to it. And so as one of those people, I want to thank everybody else that fights and struggles and goes through this battle along with me, and because it's not easy, and no one ever said it would be, but it's worth the fight. And if we continue fighting the good fight, in the end, we will all, be better for it. So yeah, I want to thank everybody again for joining us, because like I said, this crop is critical for the survival of the American farmer. And if we can put the tools in their hands and put the processing at their fingertips, then we will really have something serious, and we can really heal all these areas that the oil industries and chemical farming and everything has done for the past 30 years. People are dying of cancer just all over these rural communities, and glyphosate and every other chemical that has been just laid down on all the fuel on our food source has definitely impacted rural America. And so I'm hoping we can pull out of this chemical society and get back into a natural, more homeopathic, so to speak, kind of way of living, because we can do so much better with plant-based materials, because everybody benefits truly. So yeah, I hope everybody, if you have any questions, I'll be around so I appreciate everybody's time, and yeah, thanks again for supporting hemp.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. And I appreciate that. And we're now into our question and answer portion. So if you have questions for Rob and Andrew and Ryan, now is a good time. I think I put in most of the questions with Rex, so we'd love to hear questions from you all, if there are any in the chat.
There are a few in the chat, and I can read them to you. Yeah, we've got quite a few actually. So let's see. First of all, Rex asked Rob, do you use feminized seed for CBD production? And Rob did answer. Rob, are you here still? May have jumped off.
No, I'm here.
Oh, great. So yeah, do you use feminized seed?
Yeah, I replied, yes, we do use feminized seed, but feminized seed it varies depending on who you're getting it from. Some, I think one of our varieties, it was only like, now it was probably more than 0.5% non-feminized. So we ended up, I think our total count on all of the fields was like 11,000 male plants or something. But again, that was out of 1.4 million. So, but 11,000 male plants, that's a lot of plants to try to go find. And we pulled a lot of them down. We didn't really have any pollination issues, little bit of seed here and there, but it was a lot of labor. It was a lot of labor, and some varieties, had probably less than 0.1% males, and then other ones had a little more than 0.5%, and that's a big difference. So, feminization rates are, they vary, and it just depends on the varieties that you use. So,
Sure.
Thanks.
And
And
that's true.
yeah, go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
I'm just saying that's couldn't be any more true.
Yeah.
Those numbers that they say 88.9 or 99.5, I mean, it's just I think they make them up.
Yeah.
I also had a question about drying for CBD. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process?
Well, again, what we found here was that our field conditions are optimal for drying. And so cutting the plants and letting them dry in the field for 3 to 4 days put us down at like maybe about 15% or less moisture content. And so we were able to just field dry, and that's where we had the best success. We field dried for 4 to 5 days, and then we picked up with the combines, and then we shipped it off, and we had the highest cannabinoid potencies when we field dried. Again, when we silage chopped wet and then we baled, that's where we had the biggest losses. And I had a hard time pinpointing when it happened, but I'm pretty certain it happened during transport, and we had a hang up with transport, and the wet bales sat under black tarps for a number of days. And I pulled the tarps off at one point because they were sitting there, they were supposed to go. And there was what was it? It was some kind of I don't think he had the interstate license. We were going to use our own trucks, and then he didn't have interstate licensing for it or whatever. So we ended up having to offload them off of those trucks, put them on another one. But meanwhile, while they were sitting there, I pulled the black tarps back, and it was like 140 degrees underneath those tarps. And those bales just, I think sitting in that type of heat with the moisture in the bales, even though they were nitrogen charged, I think it degraded, because that was the one place where we felt that, we had missed our target. But again, wet baling is just, I've seen it over it happened to us in Kentucky with wet bales, and we lost cannabinoid potency. It's risky. Everything has to go right when you're in wet bales. If you dry that material, then you have a much safer and stable product. When it's wet, it's unstable. So,
Rob, is there a difference in with your field drying? I understand that concept, but I'm wondering, did you do that in multiple regions, and what was the relative humidity? And if we're in different parts of the West Coast, the humidity rates are different, and I'm wondering if that was regionalized, or if you guys had that spread out for a larger case sample of the field drying. And secondarily, how did the humidity impact the field drying?
Well, again, I don't know the exact humidity numbers that we had here, but it was relatively low. I mean, I know if you were to go coastal, you might not be able to do this kind of drying. We do have some dew points that in the at nighttime, are not so desirable, but during the day, still in October, we're reaching 90 degrees plus, and it really is ideal for the field drying. If you were to go to the coast, or you were to go to Northern California, I don't think you'd be able to do the field dry the same way that we did, and have success with it, which is why we did it both ways, because there's always a chance that field drying isn't going to be possible. And that's why we had the go wheel baler, and that's why we had multiple different types of equipment, so that in case we had to do something different, we were able to pivot. And we did. We didn't really have to pivot, but we did anyways, just out of for a trial basis. And unfortunately, that had kind of backfired on us. I think had we baled that wet material, shipped it immediately, we probably would have been okay with it, because what we did with that material was those wet bales went to a drying and sorting facility where, you know, they removed all the stem and kept just the high potency material, and then you know, dried it, and they actually pelletized it for us, because that was what the extractor wanted, was pelletized material. So I don't think it's possible in all regions at all. I know it's probably next to impossible in some regions, but here in the Central Valley of California, we have very warm Octobers. And so if I was going to do it again, I would have the field drying as my method for getting that material dried down, because it doesn't, you know, the other thing, it doesn't cost anything.
I think you're speaking to the importance of understanding the entire process there, making sure that your drawing technique matches your offload technique. You know, what's next, and how do you align all that? Because you can have the best dryer in the world, but if it doesn't match how you harvested, or it doesn't match how you intend to deliver it, that doesn't really resolve anything. So it's really aligning up all those different components to get you the result that you want. And even you probably, your wet baling, like you mentioned, probably was a reasonable option, but there was a chink in that chain, and those little chinks are really where everything goes sideways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, you know, as far as my CBD crops that we've done and harvested, and to dry them down, we did a very similar field dry, but we have super high dew points in the morning, and so we took it all and just basically put it in the barn. You know, as a sizable facility, but you know, and we didn't hang it really. We actually felt like it worked better standing the crop up, just like it was in the field. And so we'd start, you know, at the back of the barn and kind of work to the door, and just standing it up, pushing it up against the wall, and just keep packing it stood vertically. And it works really well. We had air ventilation running all around the plant the whole time, just naturally. And you know, there was no moisture on it at all. So we didn't have really any of that, really that dew point. I know that moisture is really I think that's the killer really for that cannabinoid content. Really, I think that moisture hits it, it degrades, especially if you can't dry back out, can't breathe, it just suffers, you know, suffocates it, to where it just can't really dry properly. Simple as that. And so you know, if your scale is small enough, and you know, if you have a facility, I suggest that's a really simple way to do it.
That's great. And there are a few other questions that I saw in the chat about the timing of harvest, and how that impacts your crop. And so I'm wondering if you could all expand on that, how the timing, getting that timing window right, is important for CBD production, and then grain and fiber, in order to avoid shatter and grain, and in order to get the cannabinoid content right for CBD.
I'll start on the grain. So one of the challenges we have with hemp grain that you don't have with most other commodities today, because of the way that we've bred genetics, is we don't have shatter resistant hemp. And that means that when hemp is ready to shatter or spread its seeds, it's just going to do that thing. And you got to be out there and prepared, which typically means that you're going to come in early than you would a normal crop, and you're going to be harvesting at moisture levels that might be 20%, 22%. And if you get down to where your moisture levels are 15 or 12%, like you might get with a corn or a soybean, what you're going to see is tremendous field loss. So it's with grain specifically, it's really understanding that development and watching it very closely, so that you can time that and get that moisture level to where you're able to process it with the combine, but not losing too much in the field. And it's there's kind of a window there of opportunity to do it right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Andrew. Yeah, I found that early is better than late, especially because harvesting is hard and you run into problems. And so if you go in there when you behind the ball already, you're just going to lose. And so, and you'll have volunteer everywhere the next year. So yeah, I can agree more that coming in early is pretty critical. You know, and that, because you say you just, it's all over the top of your combine. You're like, oh my God, this was about a week too late. And you're like, oh yeah. So it happens so fast that time of year too, that the maturity rate is just, you know, it goes fast on you. And so early is better for sure.
And Ryan, with your fiber crops, do you typically harvest those before seed set or after? I know some people prefer before or after, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that from the fiber side.
Yeah, you know, it really depends on what we're going for. You know, if we're wanting fiber with seed, then yeah, we'll let it go a little bit. But this fiber degrades to a certain degree, and you get all kinds of wrapping because it's so big. You just get a lot of problems. So ideally, I'd do it when the male flowers. If it's dioecious, you know, you'll get the males start to flower before the females, and they'll be, you know, the first obviously. And so once that starts to kick, you start to see those males, then that's when we start to say, hey, we better get in there. You know, and we have done some you know, grain fiber harvesting, and it's a challenge. It's just so hard because it's so giant, and it's hard on the equipment. It really is. And you do lose a lot too. You're like, God dang, it's just not efficient unless you have, you know, the specialized equipment to do that. We never really did. So yeah, timing is everything with that.
Well, and you also, when you're dealing with fiber, you've got the other aspect, which is what are we trying to do with it? Because
Yeah.
if you're trying to get a more percentage of fiber versus herd, you're going to want to harvest that earlier. Where if you're satisfied with a greater amount of herd, you can get in there a little bit later. And then of course, when you talk about dual cropping, then you got a different thing there. But the plants, the actual structure of that plant, from a fiber perspective, changes throughout its life. And if you were, for instance, textile specific, you're probably in there at 70 to 80 days, where if you're, you know, mainly focused on herd and the fiber is a secondary, you know, you could let that go longer into 100 days or even dual harvest, dual purpose harvest.
Yep. You know, I'm hoping the plastic side is really going to come online for that, you know, lesser quality textile product. Right now we don't have genetics in America to grow for textile hemp, or we just don't really have any, and nor do we have the place to process it. So there's really no reason to grow it. Simple as that. But you know, if we can capture the herd and, you know, the other areas, and like I say, the industrial side of the plastic, and use that in producing other products, I think that's the way to focus on it.
I guess going off that, I wanted to ask, what are some of the difficulties with processing fiber? And I know, Ryan, that you're part of Western Fibers, which just opened a gin in California, and just wanting to know, you know, how's that going? Are they currently looking for producers? What's the process like? So if you could just talk about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, Western Fiber has taken over and partnered with a gin in Riverdale, California, and they're having great success with it. Honestly, they really are. They've had, you know, of course, make quite a few changes to it and adaptations to the gin, but they're coming out with really clean herd, and that's kind of what they were going for is the herd side. And so they're coming out with really clean herd, and then also nice long fiber that can be potentially used into that plastic side, because it's not textile grade. And so we also process down in Hollis, Oklahoma, at Western Fibers, you know, home base, which is they're a 40-year-old fiber company that has been processing cardboard and other, you know, natural fibers for 40 years. And so we're able to just barely retrofit the equipment that we have currently, and we're able to, you know, use the hammer mills and all those, you know, type of specialized equipment for processing cardboard to just go ahead and process some hemp as well. So you know, it's an adaptation process to all our equipment. We're adapting, you know, everything to kind of be stronger and harder and tougher to deal with the fiber of the hemp, because it is a strong fiber and it does wear out metal. It's pretty amazing. It'll just wear it right through. And so really, you know, that's kind of our focus is, you know, adapting our equipment to really run the tonnage that we need to in order to fill the demand. And the adapting gins, I think is something that we can do across the country, because really the cotton industry has its own, you know, struggles. And so there's some products and some synergy between the cotton and the hemp industry, I think, that could really benefit everybody. And so I think there's some good partnerships to be made there. And you know, we're excited to reach out. We actually grew a crop for the gin this year, which I don't know if you saw, it got like 22 feet tall. And so right now they're pretty set for material for this round, but we are pulling hopefully contracts for 22, you know, next year, 22, 23, and to, you know, get this facility going and keep it going basically. So it's running all the time. That's our goal.
Well, and honestly, you were very polite about it, but every aspect of it's hard, isn't it? When you're
Yeah.
dealing with fiber, right? You know, it just breaks all your equipment. And then you end up with 22-foot long stalks, which are exceptionally complicated to deal with. It's just tough in general. And we need, you know, as we get more experience, we're going to all get better at this. But we need a lot more experience before we get a lot better at this.
100%. 100%.
Let's see some of the other questions in the chat. Rex asked, can hemp meal be used as fodder for ruminants?
Well, I'm going to give that one a go because I participate in the Hemp Feed Coalition. I'm a board member there, and yeah, absolutely. But you can't enter into the stream of commerce with that cow if you do that. So
Yeah.
right now the FDA hasn't approved it as an animal feed ingredient. So it would be a great animal feed ingredient if we could get it approved, but it's really, you know, we got to get these items approved, and it doesn't really matter the animal. Most of the animals that we've done testing on have shown good results, unless you feed them straight hemp, and I'll be honest, they'll get diarrhea. That's not good. But if you keep it at about a 20% ratio, sometimes as low as 15, it's an excellent additive that can bring a variety of results that are positive to the animals. But we really have regulatory hurdles that we have to get over in this country in order to make that a reality. This also, I want to point out, drives up the cost of production quite dramatically. People don't really realize how the fact that we cannot feed animals hemp actually makes the United States less competitive with Europe in a lot of different regards, because you could grow, and there's a lot of the byproduct that we have right now from growing even cannabinoid flour or grain could be used for animals, which ultimately lowers the cost of production. But because we don't have that outlet, we're constantly looking for just human-based consumers, which drives up the cost of production, limits the economic output capability of the United States, and then makes it harder to compete. And that's true across all areas, whether it's grain, fiber, or cannabinoid production. The cost of production is increased by our inability to feed animals hemp.
Yeah, we got to get that fixed. We got to get that fixed quick. They're a great source. You know, they actually need it. You know, corn goes right out the back end. Really not a very good food source, but we feed a lot of corn to a lot of cattle. So there's a better way.
Yeah, I mean, the regulation is a whole other ballgame. And our next webinar is going to be focusing on just regulation and future regulation and all that, because it seems like there's a lot that needs to be fixed before we can move forward. Well, kind of pivoting, we have a few agronomic questions from the chat. One for Rob. Rex asked, Rob, in the future, in view of your experience with berry drip, will you use drip or sprinklers to water young transplants?
We had talked about that. I think, I think sprinklers are a great way of watering in. I think if you had the ability to sprinkler water in all your transplants, that would be amazing. That would work really well. And then once they establish, you can, switch to the berry drip. They even considered if there was a way to do surface drip and subsurface drip, because the problem with obviously the above ground watering is weed problems. If you can keep that moisture underground, you can limit the competition from weeds and everything. So early on, if you can start with some above surface, whether it be a surface drip or sprinklers, and then move to an underground later to limit the weed competition, I think that's the way to go. So yeah,
I can agree more. We've had great success. I run all center pivots, and there are some adaptable systems called the Dragon Line that you can hook onto your sprinkler system to make it a surface drip sprinkler, basically, and put your plants on a 60-inch spacing. It depends on your drops on your sprinkler, what that spacing is. Some are 44 inches, some are 6 feet, some are 5 feet, but you could adapt that and run your Dragon Line right next to the plant and go in a circle, basically. But I agree, a hybrid is the best case scenario. I love to have that myself. Subsurface drip is extremely expensive, about $2,500 an acre to put in. So it adds up very quick. When you're doing 120 acres, that's $250,000 roughly. So it adds up pretty quick. So but it is an ideal way to water. Truly it is. I've done a lot of subsurface drip, and the plants just respond amazingly, especially if you have like a little bit of a plastic film with the drip in the film. I've had some really good cannabinoid production that way. But as far as grain production and dual crop and all that, center pivots and that's really the best way to water on a large scale.
Great. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat. And Mike, you probably have some questions.
No, I mean, they answered most of my questions.
We might be good then. Everyone really did answer all the questions.
Awesome.
That was so thorough.
That's our goal.
Guys were great. I can't thank you guys enough. It's of course, you guys are all, I know most of you personally, so it's great to be with you all, and I really appreciate the time that you took to help us out with this. It means a lot. So I got Rob's cough now. So, but thank you, Rob, Ryan, and Andrew. And
Thank you, Mike.
I'm sure we're gonna get a lot more questions for you moving forward. Hopefully they all have your contact and can reach out to you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I appreciate everything you do, Mike. Keep doing it.
Trying my best, buddy.
All right.
You guys.
thank you guys, appreciate it.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Take care, Andrew. Rob. Well, just stick around. You don't have to leave, but that was great, everybody. It was wonderful. So I think, Catherine, if there's no break here, we're just ready to roll right into the next panel. Perfect. So we're gonna move into this next portion of the presentation. Our next segment here of this presentation is called we're this navigating markets and contracts. So as we move into that, we're fortunate to have 4 other what I would and 4 other people I know are experts in their field. This will be a panel discussion led by Tom Dermody. With Tom holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Policy with a specialty in agriculture production and innovation. He transitioned to hemp in 2015, and since then, Tom has steadily matriculated in various operational positions pertaining to industrial hemp seed production, agronomy, and market analysis. Tom serves on multiple advisory boards concerning hemp's nascent commercialization, including the Colorado Hemp Agricultural Management Plan, the Colorado Hemp Research Authority Working Group, and most recently, he was nominated and subsequently approved as a member of the Colorado Hemp Advisory Committee. Tom is deeply interested in how hemp can play a role in diversifying crop holdings and the subsequent opportunities available to producers across the United States. We'll also be joined by Julie Lerner. Julie is the founder and CEO of PanXchange. That's a trading platform and market structure solution for physical commodities that specializes in bringing liquidity and efficiencies to thin and nascent markets. The company is the leading benchmark price provider and the only institutional grade trading platform for the U.S. industrial hemp market. She was selected as a future Industry Association Innovator and selected for the exclusive and inaugural list of the Forbes 50 over 50 Women in Finance and Most Admired CEOs by the Denver Business Journal. She holds 2 U.S. patents on the PanXchange platform, and she's a regular contributor to the industry trade publications and Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Bloomberg TV. Welcome, Julie. Eric Singular serves as a senior hemp analyst of leading business intelligence in a cannabis data firm, New Frontier Data. He works with farmers, regulators, attorneys, researchers, and business leaders and businesses leading the resurgence of industrial hemp as an agricultural commodity in the United States. His path into the hemp industry began in 2018. And last, but in no way least, we're joined by Hunter Buffington. Hunter is the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for Santa Fe Farms and the Executive Director of the Hemp Feed Coalition. Her policy and advocacy work is focused on representing farmers and stabilizing the supply chain by commoditizing hemp byproducts, including animal feed. As the Executive Director of the Hemp Feed Coalition, she represents a diverse set of stakeholders from across the United States and Canada. Its members were brought together by their motivation of increasing the health of the planet, our pets, and production animals, and ultimately for ourselves. As the Executive Director, Hunter utilizes her experience working with regulators, policymakers, nonprofits, and businesses to implement strategies for developing our emerging hemp industry. Welcome, everybody. And Tom, the floor is yours, virtual floor.
And thanks for that great intro, Mike. Always a pleasure. Kick things off. Julie, a lot of your work has focused extensively, not only on hemp, but other markets that suffer from maturation and oversupply. We're all well aware of the oversupply that cannabinoids witnessed in the 2019-2020 crop year, but could you comment on how this action has impacted both the cannabinoid market and other product types like grain and fiber in this crop year and moving into next? Julie, you might be on mute.
Like I said, I'm new to Zoom. Thank you, Tom. So in preparation for this, I was told that there will be a lot of people on this call that are new to hemp or considering hemp. In case that is still true, if you'll humor me and let me give you a 5 to 6 sentence history of the landscape, which will make it clearer where we are today. So while no one's to blame, the oversupply in CBD in 2019 and 2020 has proved extremely detrimental to the industry's growth. Specifically, when you see an 80% drop in prices in 6 months, as we did in biomass starting in July 2019, New investors are pretty few and far between. And that was just year one of hemp. In 2020, everyone entered into tolling agreements in part to postpone the realized losses in biomass prices, but of course, mostly to preserve the quality. So what happened since then is everyone processed from crude to distillate to isolate to preserve the quality. From the grower to the processor, you have got kilos stuffed in every corner, getting sold potentially only when there is a cash flow problem. And so what led to that was February 2020 to February 2021, the slide moved from biomass into these some refined and semi-refined products, and they slid from anywhere from 61 to 76%, Feb 2021. So that's what got us into this year. And by the way, all this data comes from our reports, our monthly reports and our white papers. So the two things that are saving the market today are broad spectrum distillate and isolate exports, as well as D8 sales. It's eating through that oversupply and stabilizing prices. It's extremely welcomed. So with that backdrop, our growth has been definitely smacked down this year. It's disappointing, but it is still happening. With regard to cannabinoids, again, if there are people seeking to get into this market, you need to understand that this is an ingredient market. It's going to be a high margin, low volume market compared with like the grain and fiber we've been speaking about a little bit today. But don't be fooled by the promise of FDA approval, please. There are still entities saying that we're going to get to $7 billion in CBD this year. Look, the world aspirin market is $2 billion. Okay, let's keep it real, people. With acreage, getting to your specific question, Tom, and thank you for humoring me with that backdrop.
No worries.
So Pacific Northwest states all dropped over 80% this year in acreage. It needed to happen. Colorado is now the highest at 34%. CBD acres are 66% of what's planted. And by the way, please do not rely on licensed data. There's underreporting. It's not accurate at all. We need to go with planted acres. So cannabinoid planting this year is at about 20,000 acres this year, which is down 55% from last year. Again, going back to the aspirin situation, our annual supply and demand reports show that just 3,000 acres can supply the entire cannabinoid market. 3,000 acres. Okay, so that's going to put us at about 10,000 acres oversupplied. Again, I think D8 is really helping, and I hope that makes my numbers wrong, but not by a lot. And then on the industrial side, this is where the crush, the historical crush that we just talked about, gets disappointing. While fiber and grain is up, industrial hemp growth is up this year by percentage of total. It's actually declined from 17,000 acres to 10,700 acres. And we think that's going to yield about 35,000 tons of hurd and 15,000 tons of bast fiber. Those are the numbers.
Well, that's quite interesting. And I would want to point out, I think it's been a little bit more of a long haul to many of the great points that our prior presenters made. The agronomy focus required to involve yourself in the likes of grain and fiber production has taken a relatively long amount of time. And with those issues satisfied, I do think that there's a good opportunity for onward growth relative to the challenges that you described with CBD. Before we move on, Eric or Hunter, do you have anything to add about kind of the dynamics between the loss of acreage between cannabinoids and the relative increases that we've seen for fiber and grain over the last couple of years?
I'll jump in really quick. I'm sure Eric has something to add. I think when we think about the future of the hemp industry, we really do need to consider that what we want is to become an agricultural commodity. And what does that really mean? It means processing that can meet demand and that is ready and able to take on the supply. Julie talked a lot about the factors that led us to 2019 and 2020. And I would just caution anyone that is ready to jump into the hemp industry to be cognizant that you do have to have somewhere to sell it. Treat it like you would any other agricultural commodity. And I'm a huge fan, this was mentioned in my bio, commoditizing those byproducts. Always be thinking about your finished product and hopefully be thinking about finished products. And that way we can take our place in that kind of agricultural sector as a proper commodity.
Awesome, and thanks for that. And just to follow up on the, filling the bottom line theme that you were getting at, Hunter, Julie or Eric or Hunter, do you guys have a strong feeling about a particular minor cannabinoid or other qualitative measures that can offer a price premium to folks that are maintaining their involvement in the cannabinoid sector right now? Is that it, as opposed to just D8? Is that CBG or another aspect that you feel has provided an upswing in opportunity for folks?
Eric, I think you can best answer this. I can only say that the minor cannabinoids are commanding a premium to CBD still, and will continue to do so.
Absolutely. Well, I want to just take a brief moment before getting into the meat of these questions to just thank the National Center for Appropriate Technology, Catherine, Mike, everybody done such a wonderful job today to put this together. And really the first panel was, I think, one of the most informative pieces of presentations I've ever seen on how to get into farming this crop, of which there are just so many nuances. And I think I just want to shout out Andrew Bish for taking us through kind of all of those different challenges in the entire production process that are really, really keen to know before you jump into this. Back to the first question for just a moment, Tom. I think the shrinking acreage this year was actually for the best, and kind of is a sign that overall the U.S. market is trying to balance production with the market demand. There's been such an oversupply issue, particularly on the cannabinoid side for the last couple of years, that I think it's actually encouraging to see many producers getting out of that, letting the folks who are going to be the best suited to play in the cannabinoid production space, likely horticultural producers, specialty crop producers. That's really where that production needs to rest with, rather than large scale row crop farming. I do think that another encouraging piece, while we have seen an overall decrease in acreage this year, I think we've seen far more acres devoted to grain and fiber, if for nothing else, other research and development purposes. Folks who are trying to dial in the agronomic of farming for those end uses prior to committing to really large scale and large acreage grows. We saw a lot of folks who just want to identify which varieties are best suited for their particular regions, their microclimates, and then their processing equipment and facilities. So I think this was actually a really promising year, kind of the year of R&D on the industrial side, and hopefully that shakes out next year. And we do see an increase in acreage for industrial hemp, particularly for grain and fiber, which would be, of course, fostered by more contracts from processors and end users. On the cannabinoid point, the last time I really looked at cannabinoid pricing, CBD still decreasing month over month, basically hitting all-time lows for price per kilos. There are cannabinoids out there, minor cannabinoids, that are fetching really, really large premiums, THCV, CBC, CBN, just to name a few. But those supply chains for those cannabinoids and the genetics, the processing, the synthesizing of those cannabinoids is just very, very challenging at this point. I think there's still a lot of R&D needed on those. And I would just caution anybody who's jumping into a minor cannabinoid to learn and take the lessons from CBD to really balance, what is a feasible amount of production for any one of those minors. with what is realistic for what those markets really are, which may be very, very limited at this time.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Taking things in a different direction for a sec, came up in the course of a couple presentations earlier today, but many of our attendees may be aware of the present requirement for states to get an approved state management plan by USDA prior to the onset of the 21-22 crop year. And this is a question for all three panelists. How do you foresee the requirements of said management plans impacting operators, producers based in the West and hemp nationwide heading into next year?
I can jump in. I had the pleasure of having an opportunity to speak with a number of State Department of Agriculture representatives just a little over a week ago at the NASDA conference. And it was a very interesting experience for me that they were quite candid about the issues that they have and there was a pretty clear division for the states that were early adopters like Colorado and Kentucky. We have gotten to a point where I would say, more comfortable with our rules and our regulatory oversight, and have begun to really understand the mechanics and the finances of managing these programs. I think most of our listeners are familiar with some of the changes that happen between the interim final rules and the final rules. One thing that we were not able to remove was that DEA requirement of laboratories. And I did hear a lot of states talk about the expense of having to get that DEA certification and 100% sampling. For states that were not early adopters of the program, these were really big hurdles. And a lot of the states that chose to just run under a USDA plan did mention those two factors as the reasons that they made those decisions. And I'm just going to round this conversation up really quickly so we can hear from the other panels. But I would say that there is ever a pressing need for more rulemaking, especially around regulatory oversight. Compliance of THC, when we look at crop propagation, is a great step, but we have so many products that are on the shelf in kitchens across the United States, in feed bins, that are currently unregulated. And I want to share with the audience that this is something that the regulators mentioned over and over again, their own frustration with not being able to provide the food and feed safety in the programs that they've already got up and running in their own states. So I think we're going to hear some more about that.
Eric, you got anything you'd like to add in there?
Certainly, and frankly, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, Tom. Just with the different committee holdings that the positions you currently hold on different committees here in Colorado, because as we know, in August of this year, Colorado submitted and was approved on their USDA state management plan. So I'd be curious if you could shed some insight on kind of the process that went into that. But I would say, just two things, and one is more of a broad statement, which is just to say, in some capacities, while the overall hemp regulations in the United States have been great for letting producers really take advantage and grow a market that's been fairly robust on the cannabinoid side. If you look at other hemp mature markets around the world, there is a lot of restriction about what can be grown in terms of genetics, in terms of seed and varieties. And, not to undermine what the US has done or any of the regulations, but those models do work fairly well. Just looking at Canada, they have a very, very rigorous program for allowing different genetics to be grown. And it's reduced the need for a lot of this regulatory oversight and great burden on regulators and policymakers and the equivalent of Department of Agriculture officials to have to ensure compliance with crops. So I hope as the grain and fiber side matures, as the market matures here in the US, we start to bifurcate and really understand that when growing for grain and fiber, there needs to be some loosening of these very, very strict restrictions that are mostly concerned with THC and material from hemp production getting into a marijuana market or testing hot. The other, component of that would be remediation. I think that, one patchwork issue that has bothered me over the past year has been the different states having remediation requirements that differ. And that leaves producers sometimes confused about whether or not, they can actually do something with a crop of theirs that goes hot. So I'd like to see, I think that's just an issue that we need to kind of have an across the board policy for, particularly if material is going to be, used for fiber processing or something like that, something that's clearly not going to be consumed to get anybody high, but is just going to be used in an industrial way. But Tom, I'd love to hear just your thoughts on that.
Well, you brought up my two favorite topics, Eric, performance-based sampling and remediation. And just for folks that are listening, like, remediation is the term used to describe when a lot of hemp exceeds the legal limit of THC. There is a physical manipulation to increase the relative non-targeted biomass to ensure a compliant test for the purposes of allowing it to be fit for commerce. Now, what I would say about that is I see remediation as the short-term option that allows people to continue to innovate with respect to hemp's agronomic development, most importantly. But one of the key features that I think folks who are more based in the Pacific Northwest is the state in California, where there are a significant number of outstanding management plans under review, is performance-based sampling, which allows a state to offer a service whereby there's a 95% confidence interval that lot will not exceed the legal limit of THC. And in practice, Colorado has been a thought leader in this area for some time. What they've done and/or grain or fiber type production has been permissible for performance-based sampling, provided that individual producer has a minimum of 3 years of production records demonstrating that variety has not exceeded the legal limit. But in effect, what I think performance-based sampling does is gives us the light at the end of the tunnel to offering proficient, compliant varieties that address many of the agronomic issues that were covered earlier by previous presenters. And for those that are listening at home, I would seriously recommend you look into the advantages that performance-based sampling may offer you in both making variety selection. And I'm a known long talker about performance-based sampling, so sorry for butting in as the moderator on that one. Getting back to it though, Hunter, you brought up the NASDAQ conference, and in a recent release following that event, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture recommended a bifurcation of hemp's classification for grant and subsidy structure purposes. Cannabinoid production will likely remain as a specialty crop, while hemp grain and fiber could be designated as an agronomic commodity. Hunter, to kick things off, would you mind sharing your thoughts on how this will impact R&D as well as the next steps of commercialization for all hemp product types this year and following?
Yeah, I'm really excited, enthusiastic that they took that step. It's something that a few of us have been having a conversation around, and I didn't think that they were really ready. So there is some political activity that's focused on the hemp industry. So I think this is going to be really great news, especially for our farmers and their ability to access USDA programs. It's been very confusing to try and determine whether, your row crop can participate in a specialty crop grant. Even when we were looking at CFAP and trying to access, programs that were put in place for COVID-19 assistance, it was almost impossible between the two crops to identify what programs they were supposed to fit into. So I think that's the first thing. It provides clarity for the farming community. I think that the other thing that's really fantastic is it's going to provide some clarity for USDA Agricultural Research Services and the Farm Service Administration, as well as how do we anticipate the needs of crop production when we think about an agricultural commodity crop, you know, those grain and fiber. And then what are the differences when we're looking at a horticultural specialty crop? And an easy way to think about that is how do we understand what is square footage in a greenhouse for a specialty crop versus what is happening in an outside grow? And that affects everything from farming practices to processing to insurance and bonding and even transportation. So I'm very excited that they're moving forward with that. It's a great first step.
But what would you say the, call it, you know, percentage of that change in designation it is, given that NASDA has you know, formally recommended it at this time?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And, you know, I'm here in Colorado with you, Tom, so it's much easier for me to talk about the propagation that's happening here. And we came out the gate in 2015 with a real focus on cannabinoid driven crop production. 90 to 95% of our plantings were focused around flowering crops. And we're definitely seeing a shift towards not only traditional farmers who are now actually engaging with hemp as a cover crop or as a rotational crop. I haven't heard a lot of traditional farmers who are coming out and saying, yes, hemp is a cash crop for them yet. But it's these steps that I think as we make them that are going to attract those traditional agricultural farmers. And that's going to allow, you know, the flourishing, in my opinion, of the flower production and a side-by-side opportunity again for those commodity and row type crops.
That's great. Eric or Julie, do you have anything to add in there?
I would jump in on that and wholeheartedly agree. We're all ensconced in the hemp industry, but the stigma in the US is unbelievable. I mean, we just in our constant contact mailer had a hemp leaf and got blocked because Constant Contact has a policy. Now, and that's just a simple one. I mean, I think everyone on this call knows our banking problems, even though we don't touch the plant. In the beginning, a few months ago, I was advocating that that lobbyists need to help the hemp industry separate from cannabis. We should not be in the Safe Banking Act. We're a perfectly legal crop, but the more I think about it and the more I look at the writing on the wall, you know what? Take cannabinoids with you on that side of the business. And I don't, again, I love the CBD market, and I do think it can be a lucrative and growing market in this country, but it is not a commodity. And as soon as we separate these two, we're going to it's not only going to be good for the grower for all the reasons Hunter mentioned, but you're going to bring resources, the USDA programs, you're going to bring more investors, you're going to bring trade houses. And I know some of you think like the big Cargills of the world are bad, but listen, they bring liquidity. They take counterparty risk. They take transportation risk. They help this market grow. And so we really want to get everything but cannabinoids onto the commodity side as soon as possible.
Those are fantastic points all the way around. And I'll just add one additional thought here, which is hearkening back to a very, very important point that Julie made at the beginning of this this part of the panel, was how difficult it is to ascertain good data about production in this country. And so another encouraging development is that there will be a hemp acreage and production survey sent out to at least 20,000 producers in the US from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, hopefully in the next month or so. So that's a first step. And, you know, ultimately the data captured by USDA, I think will help inform more key policy decisions as they start to get a better sense of what exactly hemp is. Because as Julie said, the level of education still needed there is baffling on one hand, but on the other, we're making progress. So.
Yeah, most definitely. And if I could just add in one additional point too, that I think some of our producers, especially that are on his call, will appreciate, by changing the designation for grain and fiber to an agronomic, or outside of the specialty crop program, the risk profile that banks or ancillary institutions who may be interested in funding these projects to stand up the myriad of processing centers we've described also changes overnight. And that is something that, for folks that are saying, I have a good process, I just need financing to look at it, stay tuned for how this change in designation may make more traditional financing solutions available to you and those in your respective communities as well. And speaking of awesome markets, Hunter, another question for you. We've talked a little bit about animal feeds over the course of today's presentation. Would you mind, giving us a brief update as to the Hemp Feed Coalition's current AFCO submission, requests, opportunities, or otherwise for today's attendees as well?
Yes, I will try and do this briefly. It's been a really interesting 6 weeks leading up to this. So there's a few things that I might need to hit on there that will make it not as brief, but I am very excited that the Hemp Feed Coalition was able to submit the first ever application for a new ingredient definition for hemp seed cake and meal to be fed to laying hens. So there's quite a few things to unpack in the statement that I just made for you guys. So the first thing is that because we're a trade association, not a manufacturer, we have to go through AFCO first. We can't do a feed additive petition directly to the FDA. So it seems that wouldn't be too much more complicated, but everything that we do has a 6-month turnaround. So when you think about the fact that we have to go through AFCO to get AFCO's approval and then move that to FDA, it just extends the amount of time for this process to take. So when we submitted that application to AFCO, it was approved in December 2020 to be forwarded to the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. The FDA CVM did share a response with us. They have 180 days to respond to our application, and then every communication after that has to do with this application also allows them 180 days. So I think that's important to note for everyone on the call, because the average time for a successful approved application is 4 years. I used to hate this part of my job because I got to come out and be like, yes, we know it's nutritional, it's a great option, and we want to move this forward, and it's going to be this incredibly long time frame. We do have some assurances from FDA CVM that they want to fast track our application, and what that means is 2 to 4 years. So we're definitely diligently working towards getting this approval. And then some of the barriers. So when I described it as a hemp seed cake and meal, and then for laying hens, the first step that we have to do in gaining federal approval is to define the ingredient, and then secondarily to prove homogeneity across the entire United States, so that when we sell hemp seed cake or meal, we can literally put in action limits for contaminants, the range and expectations of the protein, the fat, the carbohydrates, the fiber, all of those things. And one of the things that FDA CVM asked of us was to prove to them homogeneity for a plant that has not been grown in the United States for 88 years, as we all know, and that has incredibly different genotypes versus phenotypes. So they asked us to provide a data set to prove homogeneity regardless of geography, genetics, farming practices, or processing differences. And to be honest, that is what took us the longest of all of the preparatory things that we had to do for this application. We were able to gather this information, 40 different certificates of analysis that were shared with us from farmers and processors, obviously whose best interest lies in getting this work done. So my thanks to every entity, every person that shared that data to get this over, to get it done. We're not done requesting those data. And I'll put my email address out there if anybody wants to help build this data set. Once we got that information, then we were able to move forward with the application. And then the second component that I want to take a moment is that when I said laying hens, it is actually that specific. So not only do we start with the ingredient definition, we then have to conduct clinical feed trials to prove safety and efficacy, not only for each species, but each category of species. So we're going to have to do this again for broilers, the ones that are our drumsticks. And then we have to go through this process over and over again for each of the other species that we want to feed the hemp byproducts to. So it's an incredibly cumbersome process, but again, referring to what's happened in the last 6 weeks. So we did see FDA deny Charlotte's Web's application over their designation of Epidiolex as a pharmaceutical. We have seen this response in our own application. This is incredibly burdensome for the industry. And I would like to add that in the same year the Epidiolex was approved, the FDA also approved GRAS designation for 3 hemp seed products for human consumption. So I have some questions about that. We'll see if I get a chance to ask the FDA those questions. In addition to that, we then had AAFCO come out with their position statement, and that was what originally started the conversation. I am really happy to say that AAFCO took some initiative and is reaching out to organizations like myself. I had an opportunity to speak with them yesterday about the implications of their position statement. You know, I just mentioned that it took us 2 years to gather the information, and that would not have happened without the support of the hemp industry, the farmers, the processors that were the early adopters. But when AAFCO turns around and says that they've been asking the industry to get the clinical feed trials done, this is millions of dollars in principal investigators, in livestock that may or may not be able to enter the human food chain and may have to in fact be rendered into landfills in order to do this work. It's 100 animals on 4 different rations. That's probably a great explanation as to why we started with chickens, right? That the 100 chickens, much shorter life cycle, much less expensive. But there needs to be some recognition that the hemp industry is not going to be able to do this alone. And to Julie's point, when she said, you know, the Cargills of the world, we do need their attention. And I think it's coming. The reality is that food and feed to feed the globe is going to be ever more a problem that we have to overcome. And phytoproteins are a huge opportunity for the hemp industry. And the best part about that is that the byproducts from crushing for oil are what give us those high protein products. So I think, you know, with this dual designation from NASDA, there's a lot of conversations that are happening about hemp that weren't happening 2 years ago. And I really do believe that as long as we keep on it and we let them know that there is in fact an industry that's waiting to not only overcome these challenges, but is ready to meet the kind of demand and the optimism that we started with in 2014, I think we can get there. But there, again, has to be a reality check. Julie said that a couple of times, but it can't just be the hemp industry going it alone.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Of course.
First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't say at this point that next week we are issuing a white paper specifically on hemp for the feed market. We're using data from the Hemp Feed Coalition. Bish Enterprises is one of our sponsors on this. After line editing that document, I am such a proponent of hemp for feed. It speaks to something that Andrew touched on earlier, and I know, Tom, we're going to get back to, but the multi-use of the crop, right? And now having edited this report, I know that, you know, we can speak to it in terms of its high protein content, its omega content. It is such a good nutrient for animals. So the high prices of the incumbent feed grains could help push this through. Your expedited process, Hunter, and I sure hope it does. It's going to hurt all of us individually as consumers, but it will help the hemp industry long term to get this thing pushed through. So I really hope it happens.
And I do have one final question for all three panelists. Then we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A. But in light of the frictions that we just described with animal feed prices right now, many of us are aware of the added challenges that COVID has presented with respect to added logistical costs and somewhat related commodity pricing. How do all three panelists feel U.S. hemp businesses are standing up to the opportunity of taking on volatile market circumstances in more mature commodity settings, whether that be batting off foreign competition of herd substrates to replacement or substituted products here at home?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, Eric, you've been quiet, so why don't you take a run? Give Hunter and Julia a break for a second.
Sure thing, guys. Well, it's no secret that the price of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months. Commodity prices for staple grain and oilseed crops have just been really approaching all-time highs, and I think that presents an interesting challenge and an opportunity for the hemp industry, from producers to processors to plant-based food manufacturers. Ultimately, I think there's many more than two, but there are two really interesting components here at play. One, in a year when commodity prices for corn, wheat, and soy are very high, it is difficult to get a row crop farmer to take the risk of adding industrial hemp to their crop rotation. On the other hand, on a year where there might not be so much financial impact from taking that risk, there's a little bit of an opportunity there to do, small scale relative production of hemp just to kind of cut your teeth. The other component here that's, more international in scope really has to do with the end of the trade war with China. Since 2019, the value of U.S. ag exports has risen by about 108%. So, we are seeing tremendous demand on our food supply from China, and that's keeping and likely will keep the price of commodities high, at least in the short term, paired with the drought that we saw this summer. A lot of the folks and the purview of this webinar was to kind of speak specific to issues of the West, and I think that is likely will be and continue to be a massive issue for all agricultural producers in the West in the years to come. So hemp, has historically been called a drought-resistant crop. That is, there is some truth to that, but I think we've also learned, and it was well documented and spoken about by the earlier panel, that you are going to see tremendous yield loss from growing on dry land or without irrigation, particularly for a grain or fiber crop. So I think when you start to weigh these, the kind of the influence of China, you will, on the U.S. food supply chain, and these continued issues of drought and water scarcity in the West, there's a lot of opportunities for hemp, and there is also a lot of challenges facing producers. So trying to wrangle all of those forces, I would say, is kind of a parting remark on my end, that we're in the time of working backwards now. I wouldn't encourage anybody to jump into hemp without really analyzing what end market and what vertical and what category you really want to target, and actually ensure that there's a market for it, and then kind of work your supply chain backwards. Of course, everything starts with genetics. It starts with good farming techniques, but you can have the best genetics and the best agronomics. If you don't have somewhere to sell it, you're kind of spinning your wheels. Whether it's for the animal feed market, which of course we just kind of documented those challenges, the fiber market challenges were documented well by the earlier panel, and the kind of more human hemp food market, which is growing and a lot of potential, but still relatively small right now. And we haven't seen major food manufacturers really opening the doors for hemp grain. So I would just encourage anybody, and particularly in a state like California where land and farming is expensive, I would think to really start to work backwards and work with the end market in mind. Would kind of be my parting remark here.
Thanks, Eric.
I've got to jump in here, Tom. I know you're not going to believe this, but you've managed to go over.
Oh, not the first time, Mike. So, well, yeah, take it to Q&A then.
Yeah, I actually I do, Tom. I figured since you let everybody else talk, one of the biggest questions that I want to touch on, and it's probably one of the easiest, so I'll lob it to you.
Mm-hmm.
We got a lot of farmers on this panel. How and I'm sure they're interested, if they are going to produce this, where are they going to find a market for their crop? So first question, part of the question, I guess, is, how do you go about finding markets for the crop? And then secondarily, how do you know that those markets are real? As I said, that's the easy question for you, but anybody else can feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and I think there's two parts to it. With respect to cannabinoid process options specifically, those entities are regulated at the state level, and you can easily track and trace license to a given facility in your local area. The days of shipping biomass across the country at the price points that they could levy are gone. That's a good starting point. But if someone can't offer you a quality control assessment on what they will buy for and at what price point, don't even bother talking to them, would be my second piece of advice, because that unfortunately has left a lot of people, I would say in both the cannabinoid and grain space specifically, holding on to product because of the lack of preventative controls that are presently offered to the hemp and cannabis space right now. And then there are great exchanges like the likes of PanXchange, of course, that help move things along. And for those that, and forgive me, Julie, I don't think you mentioned it, but for those that are interested in secondary byproduct and or fiber purpose grown hemp and the resulting herd trading, PanXchange has just launched a platform for that just about 2 weeks ago, right, Julie?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. And maybe if you'd like to share a little bit more with folks on the marketing side related to that venture, I'm sure they'd love to.
Yeah. Thanks for that layup, Tom. So yeah, we just opened it expanded from cannabinoids to micronized herd, 3/4 inch and 1/4 inch herd. And so if you are looking to move product, fiber or herd, let us know. And our technology can trade any of it. We're simply waiting for the buy side of the market to be ready. We are sadly still stuck in that R&D phase this year. Little chicken and egg. Do I produce without the buyer? The buyer's like, well, should I go down this road if I don't have my supply? So we need to work through that. Hopefully some of the discussions on the table can help with that this year. We also vet everyone who comes. Not just anyone can sign up. We vet anybody. Make sure they're completely a real player, licensed, and their financials and whatnot. But you should have, for the majority of your crop, you should have a direct. If you're a grower, you need to have a direct buyer. Markets like PanXchange, vendors like me, they don't really realize we are the cash market, which is a small piece of the whole. Any good trader is going to commit the majority of their crop to a few long-term relationships for size and use the cash market like us for price discovery. And let's face it, a market of opportunity and a market of last resort. That's and in this case, a herd, a new market, right? So we want to be real about what we do, but we do try to, bring buyers and sellers together as best as we can.
Great. And Mike, any other questions I guess I could look in the chat.
I think we're up against it. We hit the hard deadline. So I'm gonna try to share my screen again and see if I can close us out. So again, a huge thank you to all of you, Julie, Hunter, Eric, Tom, Ryan, Andrew, Rob. We couldn't have put this on without you guys, and the information that was shared was tremendous. So we all owe you a debt of gratitude for sharing your time and educational resources with us today. If we didn't get to one of your questions, I do want to just let you know that the ATTRA website is there. You can reach us through the hotline. I saw that most of our presenters shared their direct connection via email in the chat. So that's great. I do want to ask you again to remember our wonderful survey that we dropped in there and help us figure out how we can best serve all of you participants moving forward, and panelists as well. I do want to let you know that we have one more webinar coming up. And in this series that's coming up on November 4th at the same time slot as this, from 11 to 1:30 Pacific. And our focus is primarily going to be on hemp's regulatory climate at the state and national level. We'll be talking about crop insurance as well as compliance and also other environmental conditions that market conditions that you need to consider in terms of the regulatory side of this. So that's all I got. I want to thank everybody for coming out, all the participants. You all got a great education today from a great bunch of leaders in the hemp space. So thanks everybody, and fill out the survey.